hour-long chat with two of our prolific local costume designers, Talia Pura and Cheryl Odom. My name is Jody Drinkwater, contrary to what my badge says, it's a volunteer. And very importantly, again, the restrooms are here and right to your right. And I had a real struggle with preparing for this costume design talk because I really wanted to wear a costume. So I settled for this. We try to keep these talks to 1 hour in length. And I prepared some questions to get the ball rolling, and then we'll open up for audience questions. But once the artists came in, they, like all good artists, threw out the rules, rewrote them, and gave us a new way of looking at this talk tonight. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then Cheryl is going to give a speech. She loves speeches and wants to present her work that you see in front of you as a speech. And then Talia, when I threw that at her, she said, okay, yeah, I'll do it. So she'll give a speech afterward. And at any point that you have any questions, they're welcome. Both speakers are welcoming your questions at any point because this is all about you. So Talia is a theater artist who has worked with most of the theater companies in Santa Fe as an actor, director, costume designer, or aerial dancer. Her many plays and short films have been shown locally and internationally. She is the artistic director of Blue Raven Theater, producing original dramas and festivals like Fearless Female Voices. Yay! Some costuming highlights have been The Crucible with Ironweed Productions, All Too Human, set in the 1890s with Z Productions, and several period pieces and some pretty cool lizards for the Actors Lab. That's Talia. Cheryl Odom was a professor of theater and fashion costume at Santa Fe Community College. She's been the costume designer for Santa Fe Playhouse, as well as Santa Fe Classic Theater. She has designed for Dancing Earth Indigenous Dance Company, Santa Fe University of Art and Design, the Santa Fe Opera, the Greer Garson Theater Company, the College of Santa Fe, and many companies in Los Angeles. Cheryl has worked in the industry for over 24 years. She most recently worked on costumes for Santa Fe Classic Theater's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Welcome to both of you. And let's give them a round of applause. And now it's Cheryl's turn to give her speech. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm going to correct some of that. Is it okay if I keep sitting? You can all hear me. I've got good projection. Actually, I've been a costume designer since high school, and I graduated in 1967. So if you add that all up, it's almost 60 years of doing this. I was an actress, but my teacher realized I was really good at drawing and I made my own clothes, so I suddenly also became a set painter and a costume designer in high school. So I had all that before I took off to decide what I was going to do with my life. I'm from San Luis Obispo, California, which is now it's a hoity-toity bedroom community. When I lived there, it was an agricultural cow town, and I grew up in trailer parks because my dad was a construction worker. So I went from that to this. And I think I want to talk, I don't want to go on and on, but I'll talk a little bit. How did I get from redneck trailer trash, is what I call it, to designing at Santa Fe Opera? How did I get there? It's amazing to me. So hopefully it'll be amazing to you. So my basic training, my beginnings, I started in middle school being interested in theater because I was one of those kids that was bullied all the time. And so what I did was I was looking for a safe space, and what I discovered was all the kids like me ended up in band, chorus, or theater. So I went into theater. And I got really lucky because I had an excellent theater teacher, and all of the kids that didn't fit in, all the weirdos who tend to be extremely bright and creative, ended up in that group too. That's who we are. That's who we are. Theater people are, I would say, way more neurodiverse, way more than the general population, for example. There's a huge spectrum of gender identity in theater and people that work in theater, and I happen to love all that. So I've been very happy with my job in theater. I went off to UCLA. I got a free ride because my grades were really good. And I decided first I started in the art department, then I switched to theater, then I got interested in photography, then I got interested in something else, and eventually I started taking more of the classes in theater, and then I got a note saying, if you don't finish your credits, because I kept taking classes, I didn't care if I ever graduated, you're not gonna get to graduate. So I said, okay, I'll do theater, I'll do acting, and I got my degree eventually in acting, but I had also designed a couple shows for their smaller theater and so then what? What do? I have a degree in acting. Well, you go to auditions. If there's, in LA, it's all union auditions. So I'd go to these auditions and everybody union would go, and then I'd be the one left, and then I'd audition, and they'd tell me I should lose 10 pounds, and so on and so forth, and then there'd be the slimy producer, just that kind of stuff, and it wasn't my thing. So, went home for a year, became a hippie, phone rang, it was the UCLA Department of Theater asking me if I wanted to come back and be a teaching assistant in costume design. And that's where my career started. That's how I got to be where I am. So I got my MFA in costume design, I started working in the business. I taught at CalArts for a couple years. Taught briefly and designed at Loyola Marymount University, Cal State Northridge, a lot of educational stuff. I also got a gig being the assistant designer at the Music Center, downtown LA, which is the Amundsen Theater, the Mark Taper Forum, and the Dorothy Chandler. And so I spent a year doing that. I got a chance to design for the Mark Taper, so go me. And all that stuff is important on your resume. And I was going along and I was doing fine. Got into the film union, started making really good money, and worked with Ron Howard a lot, who was a sweetheart, one of the nicest people I've ever met. And I didn't like film. And I thought, I can teach. Maybe I'll just take a couple years off and go teach somewhere. And I started applying for teaching jobs. And I ended up here at the College of Santa Fe. And I was gonna stay for 2 years, and it's been 45. Because I got so addicted to, I'm a history geek. I got so addicted to the history of this part of the country. All the way from the indigenous to the history, to the Spanish, to the, all of that's fascinating to me. So here I remain, and when the college closed and I lost my job, I started designing for the local theater community. So I don't know if any of you have seen any of the plays I've designed locally in Santa Fe, but that's pretty much how I've been keeping myself busy and teaching at the community college briefly in their fashion program. But then they canceled it. So that's my story. How do I do what I do? Well, what is the very beginning of the process of putting a play together? What's the very, very start? Who knows what's the first thing that usually happens?
Somebody writes a play.
Well, somebody writes a play, but maybe they wrote a play 400 years ago.
Okay.
So the first thing that happens is you have a producer and you have a director, and the director is responsible for coming up with a concept, an idea of how they envision the play. I'm gonna put it in the 1950s in Chicago, or that's the kind of thing you're given. Hopefully they've done their research, so they know that that's a good place to do it. I have had directors tell me stuff like that, and then they start talking about it and they don't have any idea of the period or what they're trying to do. So the concept is the overarching thing that guides the rest of the creating the show. Then there's the director directs, you've got your designers, you've got your stage managers, your production managers, you've got this whole hierarchy of people coming together. Artists, think about this. 10, 15, 20, depending on the size of the production, coming together and creating this singular work of art as artists. Wow. And sometimes it's glorious, and sometimes not so much. There was a talk about the process, and I actually brought my textbook. This is the textbook. I had the first edition of this when I was an MFA student. It's called the Costume Designer's Handbook. I'll pass it around, you can look at it. But this is my textbook in college, and I used it as my textbook the whole time I taught at the college, as Santa Fe, Cal State, wherever I was teaching, Cal Arts, Cal State Rutherford. This was the book I used. Okay, so that's kind of the Bible of how to do it, and then I have to tell you that's not how I do it. Because there's a different thing. Talia, I think, has a little bit of this too, that because of my acting training, a lot of costume designers don't pay any attention to how the actors feel about the costumes. Wear it and shut up, okay?
Good luck.
I'm just saying.
They might wear it, but they won't shut up.
They won't shut up. And I'm just saying, I don't see it that way, because I've been in costumes that didn't help me with my character, and then I've been in costumes, this is with other people, I've been in costumes where I'm like, oh my God, this is so helpful, thank you. So it's gotten to the point with me where and an actor in a fitting will say, this really gives me this for my character or that. I feel like I'm winning. And I'm willing to make adjustments and work with them and collaborate with them. Now, unfortunately, some actors take that the wrong way, and they think that means they get to choose their own costume and then design it themselves. And I have to be very clear. The actual person who makes the final decision is not even me, it's the director. The director makes the decision about what costume actually goes on stage. So that's where I differ. I want to include the performers in the collaboration of creating the costumes. So there are steps. So here's what's in the book, but I'll add where the actors are. First step, read the play. Read it again. Read it again. Read it again and make notes. I'm serious. So you've got the thing memorized in your head. Read it, read it, read it. And then after you've read it enough, the next thing you want to do is sit down with the director. Talk about the concept. What are they seeing? What is their overall arch of concept, and how do they see each individual character? Because they're going to be directing those actors, and they have a thing in their head about their character, their personality. And that's important information if you're a costume designer, because what you're doing is creating character in collaboration with the director.
Is this before or after actors have already been hired?
After. Sometimes before. Sometimes before. But then that would be 2 meetings, because I want to know now that they've hired that actor, if they've changed their minds. Okay? So read, meet with the director, deep character analysis, maybe do it more than once. Then sometimes include the actors in that and have briefer meetings saying, this is what we're thinking about your character. How do you feel? Because hopefully by then they've read the play a couple times. And then, my favorite part of the whole process, research. God, I love doing research. I could have easily studied being a cultural historian, and I would have been thrilled with that. Cultural anthropology, they call it. Because to me, diving into the history and what it was, because I don't like contemporary plays. I want a historic play where I'm researching a period. What was it like to be that person in that part of the world at that time in history? What was that like? God, that's so cool to me. So I do deep dive, I really get into it. Then I remember spending, I used to, before copy machines, you would research a show, say at the research library at UCLA, taking tracing paper and tracing ideas with tracing paper, because there were no Xerox machines. Xerox machines, when they had them, were a miracle, because then I could just copy out of books everything I needed, and now I just copy images off the internet and send them off. But if you don't have research to show everybody, they're not going to understand why the costume looks the way it does. You know, your station in society. Are you a peasant? Are you a king? Are you the queen? Are you, what's your story? And then, after all of that's done, it's time to put pencil to paper. And that's where my ADHD kicks in, and I don't want to do it. I don't want to, to start the process of doing rough sketches. Now, some of the pieces going around today that I passed around were rough sketches, and some of them were final renderings. There's a process.
They look very polished.
You look at the you look at the research. Sometimes you're pulling from a stock, so you think, what can I use that we don't have to make? Sometimes you have to build the whole show. Depends where you're at. You go through everything, and then you put pencil to paper and do what's called a rough sketch, which is usually smaller, quicker, so you can get everything done, maybe several versions of the same character. And then you meet again, have some idea of color, meet again, director, sometimes actors, and then once it's all approved, you're ready to put the thing together and actually build what we call building. We don't sew, we stitch, we build. We don't use those gender words. People in the costume area, you don't have seamstresses and the worst. It's really offensive, even though I can do all those things, to be referred to as a costumer, because a costumer makes things, a costume designer designs the show. That's the difference. Now, some shows I do it all, but I still want to be the costume designer and not referred to as the costumer, because I've come up with all the ideas. So, fabric shopping, once you've got your roughs and you have an idea of a color scheme and the texture and how you want this to work, I go pulling costumes, I fabric shop, I make swatches. Like, used to be LA Garment District, they knew you were a costume designer and you needed swatches, and so they'd give you chop in little pieces that you could take back.
Cheryl, can I interrupt and ask a question? Where would you go to do this shopping, like say in Santa Fe or LA?
LA is a garment district, it's wonderful.
Okay, yeah, you just get
Downtown
lost.
LA, and it was all discount fabric, trim, buttons, penny a piece, I mean, that kind of thing, it was crazy. And then here, I would take the train out to LA once a year and shop. And, and then come back take a bunch of people with rolling luggage, and we'd shop everything and come back, and we'd actually save money than if we had to buy it in Mexico. And shopping online sucks. So I don't do that, because what you're looking at isn't what you're gonna get. you know.
You've got some of the fabric swatches on the actual
Yeah, that one has that is since you're holding it up, that is a computer image. It's a computer rendering that I did with a program called Corel Draw that doesn't exist anymore. And so for a while I was doing all my renderings on computer, and it was nice if I was doing a show, because when I worked at the college, I would sometimes do a show or two in California in the summertime. I could send them copies, and I
Oh,
did,
brilliant, yeah.
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 So I could just copy extra ones and send them their own batch of renderings.
And sometimes you did the fabric shopping?
Well, the
as you
fabric,
were doing
the
design
swatch on
and
there
stuff.
is for, God,
Cause I could see, it looks like this would be what they made the coats out of.
I need to take a quick break, I'm really sorry.
It's okay.
This happens to me sometimes. I won't go into gory detail.
Do you wanna wait, or do you want?
Well, based on what has already been shared, do you have more questions? Not necessarily for Cheryl, but Talia might be able to help us.
Hey,
I said you could
Or,
talk.
okay,
I
you're
can,
on.
I can do my intro. I'm very happy to see that Cheryl brought all the renderings, and I knew she would, So I didn't bring any renderings. What I brought instead is the actual pieces, so that you can see what I've done, you can see how they're done. And I'll tell you why I did them the way I did them. But just, I can go through my history very, very briefly, and then it's done for the future. So, I also started super young. At 5, I was, making my doll's clothes, which usually consisted of a rectangle of fabric with 2 holes for the arms. And my mother says I crawled around under her sewing machine to pick up all the scraps from the time I could crawl. And so just the feel of fabric was always in my blood. And so by the time I was in 7th grade, I was designing all my clothes and sewing all my clothes. And I didn't really care if kids didn't understand why I made a peekaboo neckline, because I didn't exist yet. But that's what I wanted on that dress. And so it started definitely with the sewing. Cheryl's back. Going on.
That was quick.
Carry on.
I've learned to be
Very
really quick. The construction phase is really interesting, because after I graduated with my MFA, I had been teaching the basic costume construction class for 2 years to do that. And then I started working in the industry, so I learned millinery, I learned how to make hats, I learned how to distress garments, I learned how to tailor, I learned how to make patterns, I learned how to, you name it. I could look at a costume and make it for you. And so I love the process, and I know Talia does the same thing of designing it and then making it too is magical, because then there's kind of a sense of ownership in the whole garment. There are people in the industry that really look down on that and think it's wrong, and that if you're studying to be a costume designer, you should not know how to do anything, or if you know, don't tell anybody. This is bullshit.
And then don't make the sound thing.
This is bullshit. No, I'll tell you why. I worked on a production at the Mark Taper Forum of The Tempest, and Carrie Robbins was the designer. Carrie Robbins was one of the top designers on Broadway in the 70s. So here comes Carrie Robbins. Everybody's all like this. Carrie Robbins doesn't know how to make anything. So she asks the shop to make things in a way that are literally physically impossible to do. Like the goddesses in The Tempest, she had like these looking tight evening dresses, but at the bottom there were all these pleats, or there was a big scoop like this, but she didn't want any seams. Okay, this one's a little off color, but it's hysterical. So the craft shop was responsible for Ariel, because Ariel was flying in. Ariel was a giant butterfly flying in this costume, and had these butterfly wings that took up the whole stage. You open the butterfly wings, and there was Ariel, this little person. That's what she wanted. And and then she decided not only did she want these wings, but she wanted Ariel to be able to flap the wings. So there needed to be a control for Ariel. So there was a knob. I'll have to stand up. The craft shop placed a knob right here, and there's Ariel on stage at the Marte Forum. I'm not making this up. In a Carrie Robbins, design show, because everybody was so fed up with the fact that she really didn't understand the construction process. So even if you're gonna be a costume designer and you're never ever gonna make anything again in your life, you're gonna be going around and telling the shop, how do you do that if you don't know how to make it? And I know for a fact that grad schools now are telling their students not to tell anybody that you know how to make stuff. Because, it makes you less if you're, less of a designer and more of a stitcher or a draper or, this kind of thing. Here's how I feel about that, because everybody who works in a costume shop has to have a really, really specific skill if it's like the opera, okay? If you're a milliner, that's huge. If you're a tailor, that's huge. It's as important as designing the show. You're a member of that. And I don't like that it's not okay for people to watch me distress a costume, or show somebody how to do it, because that's part of the teaching that I love. So there's a real difference there between my personal philosophy and a lot of other costume designers. So there's that. So you're constructing the show, and then you've always got in the back of your head as costume designer, when is photo call? Because they don't, and this last group I worked with, they would let me know 3 days ahead, oh, we got the photographer coming. And half the costumes wouldn't be done. So photo call's an important thing to know about, and schedule. This is what stage managers and production managers are for. So that you know down the line who's in photo call and when those costumes have to be finished. You go into fittings, trying on the costumes. Usually it's the person constructing, or sometimes at the opera it was 3 or 4 people in the dressing room. And there would be, the craft people, the milliners, there's the dye shop, there's the tailor, the draper, the designer, the assistant designer, and then this poor opera singer been standing in the heat and fainting in this period gown because we were all fussing over the costume, trying to make it perfect. You get into final fittings, and what I like to do at that point is invite the director to come to individual fittings if they can, and look at the final fittings and look at the costumes if they have any issues. It keeps it from coming up during dress rehearsal that they have an issue, because they're gonna see it in a fitting room. And then you finish the costumes, and then you go into dress rehearsal. And sometimes there's 1 or 2 dress rehearsals, sometimes there's a week of dress rehearsals, sometimes there's 10 days of dress rehearsals. But you go into dress rehearsals and the actors are in costume every night and they're being directed. And the costume is only one element, because you've got the lighting designer lighting the costumes, you've got the set designer looking at the set, there's all this going on. Dress rehearsals are intense.
I'm sorry, you wanted me to hold your hand if.
Yeah.
And I think I was gonna have to dive on you for me to reach you. And I just wanna make sure that we give Talia.
Oh yeah, let me
a
finish up
chance.
real quick.
Sure.
I've covered most
Tie
of this.
that up. Thank you so much.
The most important thing for me, other than the history research, is the collaboration of all these designers getting together when it works well and working on a single work of art. Think about that. There's not maybe a dance company will do that, but that doesn't exist in regular life. And not only that, they're a bunch of artists and they're all coming together with this concept. So if I had to say the one thing that really drives me is that chance for collaboration and the research, or those two things. Can I say one more thing?
Go ahead.
I turned 75 on Christmas last year. And it's getting rougher and rougher to do what I do. So I'm thinking of that R word. And I've been told you can't do that if you're in theater. Well, BS. I'm thinking of retiring because there are other things I want to do. So this is the first time I've mentioned it to anybody, except my close friends. These two know it. There, I'm done.
You want to say that to the very end, or do you want to?
Well, yeah, I want you to have your chance.
Well, yeah, but take some questions, because I'm sure there are some.
When you're building these costumes well in advance of the performance, do you have a standard seam allowance you use in case the actor changes or changes size?
Oh, that's a really specific, yes. What we often do, if there's time in a professional situation, is make what's called a muslin. And what we do in Santa Fe Theater is we take an old sheet, but we make a mock-up. And when we make our mock-up, it sometimes has like 2-inch seam allowances everywhere. And we pin the whole thing together on the actor with all this extra space, put it together, fit it, take it apart, and turn it into a pattern. You don't buy a pattern. That's not the best way it's done. It's best if it's done on the actor so it fits the actor. So that's the process. Your first fitting is in a muslin, your second fitting is in the fabric, and your third one is the final fitting with hopefully the director and the actor. Does that help? You want all that extra room. And everything is draped. There's hardly any flat patterning. Everything is draped on mannequins. Yes?
How do you get the job?
Which job?
Like when you sit down with the director to find out their vision, how did you get that job?
You mean being a costume designer?
Right, so an actor auditions, right? Do you apply, or is there a website somewhere, or?
No, to get a job as a designer, it's name recognition, unfortunately.
You gotta get known.
You're known. The more people know you, the less they care about your portfolio. But you do, when you're starting out, you have a portfolio, you have a resume, you're sending it off. You know, you're showing photographs, examples of your work, and that's how you start first getting your work. But I'm at a point now, I've got all these renderings I don't know what to do with.
Do you work for someone like you to get that experience, like as an understudy or something?
Apprenticeship?
Yes, to gain that
Ever
portfolio.
taken an apprentice?
No, actually, because my 2 years at UCLA as the teaching assistant was like an apprenticeship. By the time I was done with that and could design, I was ready to go to work.
No, I meant, do you ever take on an
Apprentice. Oh, I used to,
Like,
all the time,
in the
they
last
used to.
10 years, for example?
Yeah, Monte del Sol Charter School used to have a intern program,
They
apprentice
might
program.
still do.
They still do, and I used to take high school kids all the time.
Neat.
Okay, I have an unusual question, this would be a good time
And
to ask
then
it.
she needs to go, because she's been,
I don't, I'm sorry, I don't expect an answer right now, but I'm gonna sit through the next lady's presentation happily, and then after this is done, maybe someone can help me with this. I got my MFA in costume design in 1985 at San Diego State. I know all about the LA Garment District. I did my 2-week free internship at the opera. They hired me the following year as the dyer in '86, and then I ended up moving out here in '88, '89. I worked in the craft shop, and then my life took an exit stage left off the stage, and I went into being a self-employed jeweler.
A what?
Doing a jeweler,
Oh, jeweler,
doing
okay.
retail shows, because I just didn't see the pay in theater and opera and all that, because with the degree. Okay, so now that the R word has come up, I'm 70. I've retired from my jewelry business. I'm doing other like recycled fashion for the trash fashion show and stuff for fun. I'm trying to purge, and I have the first edition of that book. I've got costume history books. I've got tons of renderings from my career. I've got all my class notes from getting an MFA in costume design. Where can I direct these? Because I don't want to throw them in the dumpster, and I don't know if they would like, we can talk afterwards.
Yeah.
If you know of like any classes or any up and coming designers.
Why don't you start designing again? Around
Because
Santa Fe?
I'm too busy with the ski pass, with my gardens and
Yeah,
camping.
well, you're where I wanna go.
And I can't. So my little RV van that was for my art show business is now a camper, and I am retired, and I just,
We'll talk to you.
it's been really invigorating to listen to you because of the similarities and the, you know, being there, and like, I knew the answer to your question, what's the first step, is the production meeting. But
Oh, I've had that on here, I didn't have time for it.
I kind of left the field, and, okay, I'll end with this. Watching the Oscars last month, the guy that won the best costume for the Wiz, he worked at the opera when I did in 1986. I'm like, Paul Teaswell, oh my God. I got through my pictures online, right? There he was. I was a 20-something-year-old working in the craft shop. So it's like, oh, if I'd stuck with this field, maybe I'd be sitting up there, but I didn't. I went into a different direction.
Yeah.
So just if people think while the next lady presents and other questions are asked, afterwards come up to me, because I don't know what to do with all my renderings and all my books and everything.
I wonder if some theater company would be interested in doing a retrospective of your work.
Well,
Like
it's
a
from the
gallery show.
80s. I mean, like, seriously, it's 40,
Are you on LinkedIn, or do you have a digital portfolio, or?
I'm retired.
So when I moved here 10 years ago, I took photos of all of that, and then I turfed them.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing you
I
said?
threw them in the trash.
Okay, see, I took photos, I digitized everything, but
Which hurts.
I can't throw them in the trash.
But that's what I did. Because finally, what are you gonna do with them?
Yeah.
I hauled them move after move for all those decades and then just.
Is there a program still at the College of Santa Fe?
No.
College of Santa Fe doesn't exist anymore, it's called the Midtown Campus.
Oh, that one, okay, yeah, when it was.
That's
Burger-
not going
the
well.
Burger-
We don't even wanna start talking.
Okay,
about
well,
that.
I'm sorry to take up so much
Yeah,
time.
was there
I
another
have a
question?
question.
We'll move on.
Yeah, mine I think is quick.
Good.
I was thinking about the interaction with the set designers and the costumes, because
Yeah.
of the thought of perhaps some of the costumes might not work very well with the set.
That's why you have production meetings.
Okay.
Yeah,
I forgot to
yeah.
mention that.
Yeah, don't match the wallpaper, or contrast the wallpaper, or whatever. the case
Every-
might be, but you acknowledge the wallpaper.
Every department working on this show should get together, my opinion, once a week for at least an hour, maybe two. Everybody touches base on where they are in their process. Stage manager runs the meeting. And then you hear from, and you're looking at renderings, you're looking at set design, you're looking at, lighting ideas. And the process is sometimes as short as 2 or 3 weeks, but ideally it's 6 weeks or longer to really work on getting it right.
And some companies here do that, Playhouse does that.
Yeah.
Those meetings.
Sorry, what was the question? I missed it.
How do you make sure all the departments are working together?
Oh.
The set
It's called the
especially.
production meeting.
Yeah.
And I have issues with the hierarchy really quickly, where only the designer shows up, but I've done all those other jobs. I've been a stitcher, I've been a tailor, I've been a milliner, I've done all those other things. And it's a skill that's just as valid as drawing a pretty picture. And so what I did when I started Santa Fe Classic Theater is they were paying me 3 times as much, and I made it equal, so that everybody working on the production got paid the same amount, because everybody was working just as hard. And if you're at a sewing machine, it doesn't mean you're of less value than the person that drew the picture. My opinion.
Yes.
That needs to change, but who knows? I mean, it's been like this for centuries.
Okay, so,
Talia, you're on.
yeah, Cheryl covered things beautifully. So I don't have to. And, since moving to Santa Fe, I have not had the privilege of working on some of the processes that she's described. My own background, as I started to say, was the sewing of the costumes, but when it comes to theater, I've always done it all. After high school and after doing a lot of everything in the theater department in high school, I actually went into interior design because my father convinced me that that was a much more stable living. And at that point, the best place in Canada to get, I'm from Canada, the best place to get a design degree was in my own city. So I had 2 years of interior design, which taught me a lot about basic design and drafting skills. And in those days, there was no CAD program, so I knew which pen wicks to use how, and you learned how to do that. And after 2 years of that, and I did very well, and I enjoyed it, but it was a very, very heavy course of study. But my real love was theater, so I switched programs and did my degree in theater. But I did a degree in theater. I can't see you, so you can't see me. I did my degree in theater in a place where you had to do it all, and so I wasn't just taking the acting classes. I also had design classes. I also had directing classes. So you had to learn how to do everything, including technical. And so that's the degree I got. And then my advanced degree actually was in writing because I'm also a playwright. So I've always done it all in theater. And sometimes I haven't expected to do it all. So what I brought for you today is a couple of examples of what I have done that didn't have the luxury of starting with design plates. I did not do any renderings of my ideas because in the one that I'm going to show you first, I had 3 weeks. It was just under 3 weeks before opening night when I found out that I was also the costume designer. I was directing it. And so I had 3 weeks, and it was Rosemary Zebert's play All Too Human. And she had first written it as a movie script. So there were 22 scenes, and each one of those scenes took place on a different day. So I was not about to put any actor in the same costume when it was supposed to be a week later or a month later or 5 years later. And so I focused mostly on the women. You can get away with a lot more with men. You can change up little things. They might have had a new tie at occasion, or maybe they took off their waistcoat and were in their vests on one scene because it was appropriate to do so. But generally, it was the women that were the problem. Like you can't just change them up. So what I got in from that show is a couple of the costumes I did with a 3-week deadline while I was directing the show. So what I did for all of them, really, I had no time to go fabric shopping. So what I did is go to thrift stores and buy things and rejig them. So this play was set in the 1890s. And so of course you research and make sure that you're meticulous about the details and the silhouette is so important. You're not gonna put them in huge bustles when they had narrowed them down for that year and that sort of thing. So then what I landed up with was, this is one of Anne Roylance's costumes. She had 9. She had 9 costumes. And because her character was bohemian, in one case I got away with putting her in a gorgeous, authentic old kimono. Because she's the kind of character that even in 1890 would, when she's at home, possibly have worn a kimono. So I could get away with a few things like that. But this was a costume where she was going to be meeting people. So of course she had to be dressed properly. Now the underskirt for this would have been a simple, I think it was a black velvet A-line skirt, which she loved so much I let her keep it, so I can't show you that. But what went on top of that suit was something that I bought at thrift that was a very large size, but it was actually a mini skirt with a jacket. So because it was a large enough size, I was able to take it all apart, make it fit Anne, and there was enough material left over to put a little peplum on that would represent the age or the era a little better. And it was a 3/4 length sleeve, so I took down the cuff and I added in a little bit of a shirt underneath it to get away with to be able to lengthen it, because I like the color for the character, I like the fabric. And the other thing is that I'm always looking at budget. I have not, since moving here, generally had the privilege of working with a company that has a huge budget. There was a time in history when I sewed everything. If I wanted a special thing, I sewed my first wedding gown when I was 16, and I've made many since. But there was a time when it made sense, where I even sewed my kids' sweatsuits, because you were saving money. And then that changed, and all these cheap clothes came in from Asia. So instead of my kids going through the knee of a sweatsuit that I had spent a day making, they could do that with a sweatsuit that cost me less than $10. And you couldn't sew for what you were picking things up for. Well, that is doubly true for costuming now. This little miniskirt suit probably cost, I don't know, $5. But it gave me enough material with a few add-ons. I took apart the skirt and could make her a train by adding in things, and then you add in the details. So I just carefully put this mini skirt down on the table and started chopping away at it until I got what I needed. And then got some ribbon to add in the pleats and make bows, and this little textured thing. I love to add textures, because on stage that means something. If you have heavier textures, it's going to have a richness that you're not going to get. So I could have afforded to go and buy all this material in broadcloth cotton, which would have looked really shitty.
Is that collar actually the waist of the miniskirt?
Oh. This is a skirt.
Right.
This is the skirt. In fact, the label is still in here. It was a size 12. So what you landed up with, of course, there's a skirt underneath all of this, right? But you land up with a front skirt, which was a thing. I sewed in a bum pad so that she could change quickly. So it was included in the costume. She had a different one for different costumes. And then there was enough fabric to be able to make this train. And this was a scarf. This is a winter scarf that I chopped up and used for trim.
Did you sketch it out first, Talia?
No,
You just started
I
doing
just
it?
did it. I had no time.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'd taken the time to sketch it all out and plan it all out, no, I had to find the things and I just had to get it done.
Can I interrupt really quickly?
Sure.
Okay. Has anybody seen the classical theater of Shakespeare productions at the Botanical Garden? Because I discovered that 10% of the world's pollution is caused by the fabric and fabric.
Oh God, I'm gonna do a whole radio show on that very soon.
So I started doing what she did,
Yeah.
and all of those productions are tablecloths and
Yeah, because
bedspreads and-
fast fabric, it drives me insane. I literally get sick to my stomach when I go into a mall and I see a whole rack of the same dress in various sizes. Like, I get ill. I cannot do it anymore. Thrifting is everything I wear is thrift. Or I go to a clothing exchange and a friend gave me this top and I find out that she once paid $350 for it. Who does that with a t-shirt? I guess it's hand painted.
Savers is everything.
So anyway, this would have started life as a little mini skirt. And then it became a cape. I added a ruffle, I added the bow. I don't know what happened to the skirt for this outfit. I'm assuming it's jammed in my closet somewhere. But to change up the look of it, this character, there was a skirt and it started life as an evening gown. So it was a cheap evening gown that I chopped the top off of and made the skirt, and it had a nice A-line and it was just perfect. And then I did have an overskirt for this costume too, a huge one with a big train. I don't know where that is. Oh, anyway, it's gotta be in my closet somewhere. So then I just found a shirt and I added in the ruffles to make it period. So you just kind of do what you can, respecting the period, but using the materials you find. I'm also really, really lucky and very good at manifesting what I need. So I know what I'm going into a thrift store to look for, and then I just pick it up and take it home. I needed a tuxedo once, and I found one for $15. You know, you gotta channel these things. So this is another example of somebody's, this would have gone over the bustle, and it would have gone over some other skirt. And, it started life as a skirt. We all know these crushed velvet skirts, right? They were a big thing, what, 90s? So you just repurpose and make it happen. This one, oh, this would have been the front skirt, possibly for that, maybe for a different one. But again, it started life as a little skirt that I chopped up. So that's already lined, it's already done. You know, with a 3-week deadline, I couldn't possibly start from scratch. You had to just do something. Now here's one that also happens to be from costuming Anne Roylance. Do you know Anne? You all know Anne. She's done a lot of theater around town. So this was for a show at Adobe Rose. Is it still Magnolias? Have I got the right name?
Yeah, good.
One with the writers in the room. And I'm not coming up with details, it doesn't matter. The important point here is that this little suit, the director wanted her in green, and it's the 40s, so it had to be period, of course. So what I found at Savers was a suit that was size 3X. It was a mother of the bride suit. It was 3-piece, so it had a shell and a jacket and a skirt for 3X. And Anna's not a 3X. So by buying that suit, I was able to give her some pleats in the front and even more, and in the back. Now this would have been from the original skirt, but it's not a big deal. It wasn't big enough to matter. Besides, I chopped off so much of it because it was 3X. So there was enough left over to do what I needed to do. The jacket, of course, I had to remake as well, but I could do that because I had a lot of material. Oh yeah, when I cut off the rest of the skirt became the peplum. So the director wanted her to change things up, but only slightly. She played the secretary. And so I made this peplum for her, and she changed it. It was reversible, so that in one scene she came polka dotted, and one scene she came plain. So this was from the suit, but then this polka dot was the only fabric that I had to actually buy because everything else came out of that suit.
Good match.
Yeah, got lucky. Now that's just cheap broadcloth, but because it was just like the lining of the suit, it didn't matter. Yeah.
How did you make the costumes for when they were, I guess they were some kind of animal or sea or it was in the lab?
I brought the lizards.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I'm getting to them.
Because that is maybe the most amazing costume ever.
This is also something that Anne wore in that same show. And again, this was the director she wanted weird hats. The secretary was coming in periodically because these guys were talking about this play and they were on stage and it was supposed to take place over, I don't know, like days. They didn't eat or whatever. They never left the room, right? So she was getting more and more bedraggled, the secretary outside, you have to come back in. And so she started just changing it up, so she wanted some fun hats. So I gave her this one. This one I put on somebody just last weekend. We closed a show at Paraguas, and the pianist wore this when we did a bit from Jamaica, from the music of Jamaica. And so, you know, whatever, it had a second life. So that's why we find it funny. She also had a Queen Elizabeth style hat that was in the same fabric. So there was enough left over that I could cover a hat. What I often do is just take hats. I'm not a milliner. I don't have that skill, but I can certainly frou-frou up a hat. And I find that hats that are made for winter are generally, you know, you can find hats that you can make period when you need to. And I'm also a great collector of hats, so I do have a lot of wonderful period hats, but in that case, that's what happened. That's there. You asked about the lizards. The lizards have a special request, so I said I would try to get them. I asked for just one lizard, but they happen to both be in the same bag. So I brought them both. So let me explain. So first of all, the lizards are part of Albie's seascape. So they were literally supposed to be lizards that interact with human beings, and the humans know they are lizards. So this is just, Albie considered himself an observer absurdist
Absurdist.
writer, and that was the conceit of that play. So I had to make these lizard costumes. Now, when it comes to something like this, obviously I was not finding the fabric. This I did have to purchase and start from scratch. But this was not a huge stretch for me because I've always sewn. I remember the day that my friend's mother taught me how to put elastic in a bathing suit when I was in high school. Changed my life. When I was in my 20s, my then husband and I decided we were going to take a trip around the world, and we were going to start with beaches. And so I thought it would be cool for me to sew up a bunch of bathing suits I designed and sell them on the beach, which is what I did. I'd wear a suit and somebody would say, "Oh, where did you get that suit?" Think obscenely sexy one pieces is what I made. And you might be able to find them today, but you couldn't then. So I sewed them, and people would see me in them, so we'd go to the nearest hotel bathroom, try them on, and she'd buy it. So after that, I've sewed a ton of dance leotards for myself and for everybody else. And one of my daughters was a gymnast, so I sewed all of her gymnastics training suits as well as her competition suits. And I've sewn skating uniforms. So, I mean, making something like this is second nature. So working with Lycra is super easy. And so I made these lizards. I mean, they would be really most effective if I put one on. I think this was the woman. So that would be Emily. Emily Rankin wore this one.
How long would it take you to build something like that?
Well, this one took a minute because it was pretty specific. So just as Cheryl was talking about making the mock-up out of muslin first, I made one of these out of a cheaper black lycra. But then I had to acknowledge and account for exactly how much stretch that fabric had, because every lycra is going to be slightly different, but you just calculate that. And then I was able to sew these without any trouble, without having to worry about whether it would fit. And then we had this. Now, obviously, this is the front, but the tail came out the back. And then they picked some, they wanted some seaweed, so, and the woman, the female lizard, had a shorter tail. The guy, of course, being the dude, a longer tail. So he, Hania, played this. Beautiful. I don't know if you saw the production, you would have seen him using his tail really effectively. And he had a little more seaweed that draped down, even including the tail a little bit. So, and this was a case where Nico was the director, and I did explain to him what I planned to do with this, but then he also had some decisions to make. You know, it was going to be with seaweed or without, and he decided to go with seaweed, and then we had to source this and get something that would hang properly. And at first he said he didn't want a ridge, and so I had already made the mock-ups, and I had already I'd cut out the hoods before he decided that he really wanted a ridge. But that's okay, I managed to get a ridge out of this and stuff it and make it work. So, anyway.
We have a question here.
Yeah.
So, I know it depends on how many scenes and how many actors, but can you give me an example of like one of the better budgets you've gotten, and then an example of this is my shoestring budget?
Oh man, that's a Cheryl question, because I don't know what this is. Somebody's skirt. Okay, shoestring. I've done a lot on shoestring budgets.
That's all you get in Santa Fe.
In Santa Fe, you get nothing but shoestrings. If I'm lucky, I get my fee that includes materials. If you just get a fee and then you get another budget for materials, you can't save money, right? I mean, you've got whatever you've got to spend. but what I try to do is get my fee, which includes materials. It didn't in this case either, but, I was decently paid to make these guys. But, if it's a big show, like, for example, the Crucible, my fee was including all the materials. And so the skirts were bed sheets, and, the capes, there were 13 capes in the first scene. Could have been utilized a little more, I feel, but whatever, they were there for a second. And they were all, drapes and bed covers and bedspreads, heavier materials. So, yeah, it's usually shoestring. But what I will say, my one little thing that hasn't come up yet is a propensity for some theaters, smaller theaters, obviously, not the big ones that Cheryl was talking about. Some smaller theater directors feel that if you're doing a modern piece, you don't need a designer. Why would you? Why would you need a
Or a
designer?
wardrobe person.
No, you don't need any of that, because you've got actors, they've got closets.
I mean, don't get me started on that one.
Well, I just did, right? I just started. Because, you know, it's so important to have a designer that is going to look at what everybody's wearing. Because when you just have the actors bring in something that's appropriate, that makes them feel good in their costume, they as a character, it doesn't necessarily match the wallpaper, or it doesn't necessarily go with what somebody else on stage is wearing. I once had a production where the actors were given a lot of input, and the director really wanted them to feel comfortable in their costumes. But I was still hired, even though it was a modern piece, so it was just kind of miraculous. So one day I came in with some pieces for a fitting, and there was something on the rack in the dressing room. I said, "What is this?
Oh, God.
Does anybody have any idea whose top is this?" And one actress said, "Oh, it's mine. I wore it in rehearsal last night, and the director loved it, and that's what I want to wear in Act 1." I went, you realize that it looks like it came out of the other character's closet. I mean,
So
she had
glad
been,
you're telling the story and not me.
well, she had been influenced by what she saw the other character wear, and realized she had something kind of that she'd like to wear from her closet. It just happened to be the antithesis of what her character would have chosen.
Right.
It was exactly what I had already put on the other character. You can't be matchy-matchy if you're not, identical twins that are dressing alike. Like, you just have to think of things like that. Or in another play, I had fun with, again, a modern piece, but I had fun having the switch occur. It was, who did The Roommates? Was it the Actors Lab? I can't remember who I did that for. Anyway, it was The Roommates, and so it's somebody who moves into somebody's house. It's a stranger in the beginning, but she starts to mimic the other person, and they kind of change personalities, and it starts to be indistinguishable, and then they end up there. So there was a point at which one character wore leggings that were almost identical to something the first one had been wearing when they first met. And you just sort of come up with these little subtle ideas that the audience may or may not see, but are going to influence how they're watching the play nonetheless. Yeah.
I was wondering if either one of you have a good anecdote about an onstage epic costume fail.
Oh my God, I got it. I got it. I think there's a rendering going around. There was one from Pal Joey. I did the musical Pal Joey. We built the entire production because it's what's the word I'm looking for? Vegas titty wear. I mean, burlesque stuff. And I had the guy MC come out wearing this full-length cape, and he was supposed to open the cape, and underneath he was wearing nothing but a G-string.
Oh, did you know that?
Yes.
Was that part of the plan?
So what I did, he comes out, he comes from the back of the stage, full-length purple cape. I had put him in a dance belt, if you know what that is. It's torture, but it keeps all the bits in place on a guy. I had put him in a really tight dance belt, and then I had put the gold G-string over the top. But the problem was, that's not him though.
This is one of them from that show, perhaps.
Here's one
See if
from
there's
the
another
show.
one.
But a lot of naked looking, and they all wore flesh-colored, Milliskin is a kind of lycra that has two-way stretch that things, like if you want somebody to look naked, you use Milliskin. So everybody they looked naked, but they were wearing Milliskin, but not this guy, because he had to be in the, we had to see his body parts, take it off, and he's naked except for the G-string. But he's dancing. And he comes down, and comes out over, there was a runway, and he comes out over the runway, and he starts dancing and doing this, and all of a sudden you could see. Oh, I'm not kidding. And he literally danced his way out. Now, we've gone through 5 dress rehearsals, 5. Nothing wrong. He danced his way right out of that dance belt, and I could have died. And my students, there's one sitting right there, sometimes still remind me of that. And it's the most embarrassing thing I've ever had happen to a costume that I've designed. There you go. Beat that one, Talia.
Thank you, I think we did a good job.